where these guys would hang out over in Kingsport, like Blind Lemon Jefferson, people like that, would be traveling through and be sitting on the front porch at John Henry Lyons' house. So a lot of great blues musicians from this area. We claim crippled Clarence Lofton, the guy who invented boogie woogie piano. That would be like the blues piano in the 30s and 40s and turn into rock and roll in the 50s with Fats Domino. He's either from Kingsport, Tennessee. Some historians say he's from Brownsville, Tennessee. But I'm going to keep claiming him until someone proves otherwise. But he had a jazz club in Chicago and kind of started that whole, like, what Jerry Lee Lewis and people like that would be doing years later on piano in the 1920s. So as I was looking for a CD on Stick McGee, if we go to the next slide, this is where we get into the meat of things. I found this 78 on Kingsport Records on eBay. I was like, what the heck? I've never heard of that. So, not owning a record player, hadn't had one in 30 years, I went ahead and bought this record to my wife's dismay. And, started researching it and found out, there's like the 27 sessions here. I mean, Renee could probably find documentation and tell you what color socks Jimmy Rogers was wearing. All that, stuff like that's very well documented. But when you get into the small independent labels around the country who are only around 2 or 3 years, who never thought there was going to be any historical significance to what they do, a lot of that story is lost. So I had been in Leadership Kingsport, I guess back in around 2011 or so, and from that, I learned that if you want to make an impact in your community, find something you have a passion for. You don't always have to be on a board or be on a nonprofit or a charity. Find something that you enjoy. So I enjoy music, I enjoy history, and I said, well, I'm going to start documenting these. So I created my Facebook page, and every time I would find a local record, I would start posting it and telling stories and getting responses from people going, hey, that's my Uncle Bob on that record. And so, just kind of learning all that history. And so I tell people I'm an Appalachian music historian, as I preserve those stories that I learn about the records and the records themselves for future generations. So they'll end up in an archive after I'm gone for folks to enjoy. So Kingsport label, I know of 14 records on that label that I have a copy of. There may be at least one that I don't know about, but would you like to hear something on this label? Okay, so the unique thing to this label, there was something here in this area kind of called Hillbilly Bop. It was, all these guys have been in World War II, been around the world. So these guys, yeah, they were from Appalachia. They played fiddles and banjos, but they had been in the blues clubs in Chicago and Los Angeles, and been at army bases in Texas and seen Bob Wills and all these folks. So it was kind of a combination of bluegrass and Western swing, and a little Hawaiian music, and just the experiences of all these guys brought back from World War II. That's kind of unique to a few of the labels in Appalachia. And the record I'm going to play you is representative of that. So this is Elsie Smith, Ralph Mayo, and the Southern Mountain Boys with Radio Boogie. All right, I think we've got this queued up right. Are we ready, Sam? All right.
Well, I bought me a hat and an old guitar. I made a down payment on a second-hand car. I got me a job on the radio. Now I'm saving up money for a fiddle and a bow to do the radio boogie all over the dial. With a solid kick, a red hot lick, a Tennessee style. Every morning when the sun comes up, I'm gonna cart from the jug, gonna take a look. The sun keeps shining, gonna plow the corn. If it starts to rain, I'll grind it in the barn to the radio boogie all over the dial. With a solid kick, a red hot lick, a Tennessee style. are you all alone? Come on over and Arizona and me book to the boogie by the radio. Do the radio boogie all over the dial. With a solid chick, a red hot lick, a Tennessee style.
Okay. So that's not traditional bluegrass.
Says I got me a job in the hillbilly band. I got brand new clothes and money to spend. Everybody yells and before we play, do the radio boogie's all they can say. Do the radio boogie all over the dial. With a solid kick, a red hot lick, a Tennessee style.
All right, so you like that one, I know. That's a, yeah, I think that is the only record other than some Stanley Brothers where L.C. Smith actually played mandolin. One of the greatest mandolin players ever was from Piney Flats, Tennessee. But that's the only record him and Ralph Mayo ever made together, even though they were both in the Stanley Brothers bands from time to time, but I don't think they were ever in the band at the same time. I believe that would be L.C. Smith, yeah. So that's a great record from this region. So kind of different than what you would think. It's not bluegrass. It's not country. So it's hillbilly bop, just guys having a good time. So if you would go to the next slide, sir. So if Kingsport had a label, you know, Bristol had to have one too. So in Bristol around the same time in the early 50s was Twin City Records, and it was a little more straight-laced. It was more country and bluegrass, and there's a little bit of diversity. There was a phenomenal black gospel record on this label, and a couple like Christmas records that kind of odd novelty things. But the two major records on this label for bluegrass purists is John Reedy and his Stone Mountain Hillbillies from Harlan, Kentucky, and Ronnie Niddle and the Holston Valley Ramblers from Greenville, Tennessee. Those are $100 plus. John Reedy's probably $500 to $1,000 record, rare kind of records that were recorded here. I know there was at least 21 records on that label. I think there's 22. There's a number that me and a couple other guys have been working on to document what that missing record is. Haven't found it yet, but anyway, that'll be on a forthcoming project. But great label that was only around for about 3 years, and then the owner of that label moved to Salem, Virginia, and he would later open up a couple other major record labels up there. Would you like to hear something on this label? Okay, great. I'm glad you asked. Glad. So I've got one. This is Willie Sexton and his White Top Mountain Boys. They were from Damascus, Virginia. This is the only record they ever recorded in 1953. This is Hobo Blues.
Now they call me just a hobo, a no good rambling man, because I'm always on the road. They just don't understand the clinging and the clanging of the rails as I roll on down the line. It's a-taking me back away down south to that old hometown of mine. I got the hobo blues. I have always had the blues since my good gal went away. I've never had nothing to lose. You may have a mansion or maybe a cottage shack. I'll always be just a hobo rolling down the track. I got the hobo blues.
All right, Mr. Willie Sexton. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. That's a rare record. There's only a couple known copies of that one. He died like in 1956. So I collect records and I play them on the radio and I talk about them. But there's sometimes, this is just a story. I'm off track. His granddaughter contacted me a couple years ago. His daughter was just a little girl when he died. And anyway, she wanted to buy that record. No, I can't sell it, but I made her copies of it. So for her mom's 75th birthday, she played those songs for her mom. So anyway, her mom hadn't heard her dad's voice since she was 6. So she said, her mom cried for 3 hours, but it was the best birthday ever. So, I give back, so there's been several instances where things like that, where I've helped families or given records to, at someone's funeral and their dad was on a rock and roll record in 1972. And, just take it. If your family doesn't have one, here's one. So anyway, the rewards of doing this, I don't do it to make money or sell records. I do it for the passion of it. Although the wife will say there's a bunch I need to sell. So Sam, if you go to the next slide, I'll get us caught up here. So I guess the granddaddy of the big label in this area was Richard Tone Records. It was started in 1947. Actually, they incorporated in 46, but their first record didn't come out till early January 47. But they call themselves the original hillbilly label. So even though country music was doing okay, and a few people like the Monroe brothers, Bill Monroe, and were actually selling bluegrass records, none of the other record labels around the country would touch bluegrass, other than some of the small ones here in Appalachia. So they were the first label who, hey, these Stanley brothers, they might have something going on. They recorded the first 4 records released by the Stanley brothers were on Richard Tone. I think they were recorded at WOPI here in Bristol, but for this label. So it was around to the mid-50s, put out about 240 or so records. There's some valuable records on that label. There's several $1,000 records, a couple blues records that are impossible to find. But I don't know, I've got a good start. They're hard to find. I probably have 35 or so records on that label, but still looking for more. And it started with Mr. Hobie Stanton. So he'll show up a little bit later here in the presentation. So we're going to move on to 45s. This is my thing. I really love 45s. So we'll go through these quickly. I could turn this into an all-day thing because there's so many record labels. As you can see, I brought some examples of different labels up here. But if we go to the next slide. All right, one of my favorite 45 labels, and I just randomly picked some of them that I like to go through today. And this is not all of them. This is just a small sample of locals. Was Ed Mac Records over in Johnson City. That was owned by Eddie McKinney, so Ed Mac Studios, named it after himself. There's some good country and garage rock and some surf rock records on this label. I surprised Mike. I played him one. He's like, "That's from here? That sounds like that should be from Long Beach or somewhere." Nope, that's Manhattan Beach. No, that was here, and I don't know what they talked about surfing in East Tennessee, but they were doing it. So anyway, the one on the screen, there's 60-something releases on this label. I've got all but that one. Go in the Spotlights they were from Duffield, Virginia. I only made 200 or 300 copies of that. Can't find it. No one in the band has a copy, or at least they're willing to tell me they had a copy. A couple of the guys are still alive, but so check that old stack of records in the basement. I'll pay you well for that, or no, wife, my wife, they're going to donate it to me. So anyway, I'm looking for Go in the Spotlights. So Anyway, if you go on to the next slide there, Mr. Sam, there was a sister label there, Spot Records, same studio, just owned by a different guy, Don Bradford, and they were more like into rock and roll and soul music, even though there was some good country on that label as well. Mainly 45s, but all these labels put out some albums too, but mainly I collect the 45s. My favorite local soul record is on this label. Anybody want to hear it? All right, okay. You already know what it is. You don't even know what I'm playing, but you know what it is. So here is Kenny Springs and the Scat Cats from 1966, Let Nobody Love You. I gotta fix my wire. Hold on here. All right. Here we go.
Let nobody love you like I do. Let nobody hold you, and let nobody squeeze you, and let nobody kiss you, baby, until you hear from me, baby. Ooh, ooh. I love you for who you are. I love you for what you are. I love you because you are, yes you are. You know you're the joy of my life. You know you're my guiding star. Let nobody take you if they try to. Let it be known, dear Lord have mercy, can it satisfy you? Oh yeah, I place all my trust in you. I'm believing that to be true. Let nobody love you, baby. Oh no, like I do. Because I love you, yes I do, for who you are. I love you for what you are. I love you, nobody else would do, nobody else would do. Lord have mercy, you know what I want. Cause you know you're the joy of my life. You know you're my guiding star. Wow! Let nobody take you, baby, from me, baby. Whoa, say, here am I, baby. Lord have mercy, that's where you ought to be. Whoa, whoa, I place all my trust in you, baby. I'm believing that you be true. Let nobody love you, Lord have mercy, like I do.
Yes, sir. Some of them were, yeah. This one probably was. Well, yeah, this one would have been like on the local soul and rock station, but yeah, some of the locals. Naturally, if you're a businessman and you've got a little independent record label, you would love for some of your records to get played. So some of these guys would be very active on sending out samples to different radio stations to try to get their artists picked up. Like on this label, Don Bradford had an arrangement with RCA to do distribution for him. So a couple of these you see here, Richie Weems and the Continental Five and the True Tones, he had a 3-record deal with them, and all their records got pushed to RCA to distribute out to record labels. And a couple of the Richie Weems maybe made the top 50. And the True Tones were kind of like East Tennessee version of the Beatles, so they were kind of a big in 64, 65, and then they were nerdy all of a sudden as their style of music kind of got passed by.
And in the Mississippi Delta Blues, they were playing juke joints. Did they play live shows?
Yeah, there were a lot of live shows here. A lot of the these independent studios, if basically you had the money, they had the time. They would record you 2 songs and press you 200, 300 copies of the record, and then a lot of not only using it as like your business card to get on the radio, but to go to, a club and go, hey, or a sock hop and go, hey, we're good. We were on a record. So yeah, you guys paid $300 so somebody would record that for you. That doesn't mean it's good, but so a lot of these people sold them out of the trunk of their car. At playing at bars or clubs or sock hops or dances. So yeah, but that happened. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry, we've got under. He's been here long enough, but evidently they didn't have sock hops in Australia. So in the 40s and 50s, there would be school dances at the gymnasium, and they spent all summer buffing that floor for the basketball team, and they didn't want you coming there and scuffing it up, so you had to take your shoes off. So it was a sock hop. Mr. George?
Kenny Springs, that last record got played in Philadelphia. It's on a Jerry Glavin compilation now.
It was their first record was a regional Atlantic Coast like top 40 hit, but yeah. So okay, so we'll get back on track here, Mr. Sam. If we go to the next slide, and this is great. Exactly, yeah. It's the answer questions, have fun talking about records. So Ed Mack and Spot, they had a sister label, True Gospel Records, that mid '60s put out gospel records. There's some couple really good ones on there that are like guitar oriented, not what you would think of gospel music at the time, more rock and roll kind of gospel, like the Pentecostal type of music where it's just a guy and an electric guitar going crazy. Red Kirk is on this label. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of him. He was back in his heyday when he was a top 20 recording artist on Mercury Records back in the late 40s and early 50s, but he moved here, work on the radio and advertising and sold cars and things, but the bug never left, so he did record a couple local records. This one on True Gospel is really a really rare 45. The one I have is the only copy I've seen of it. But anyway, there's at least 13 records on that label. I'm thinking there could be up to 17 looking at the record numbers. And that's the mystery. I find a record out somewhere and try to decipher back, well, who made it and why, and who's the artist, who owned the studio, and how many records did they do? And so it's always kind of kind of finding one record and engineering backward to try to find out the story. So anyway, if you'll go to the next slide, Mr. Sam. So my favorite local 45 label is Trail Records from down in Kingsport, Tri-State Recording Company. Owned by Tilford Salyer, who was my dad's distant cousin. So if he made any money in the record business, I didn't see any of it. But anyway, but he was in business over 20 years here in the area. There's about 250 or so 45s on that label. A little bit of everything from funk and soul and R&B to to heavy metal. There's a little bit of everything on that label. The label was mostly known for their albums. They put out over 3,000 albums, but mostly Southern gospel. It was one of the 2 or 3 major labels in the country for that genre of music. But there's all over the board. Yes, sir. Yes, with Donald Flack was the drummer and the leader of the band. So this was after they kind of split from Kenny Springs. But yeah, so my favorite local soul band, so I use them on both sides as an example. That is a cool record. That is like a fusion of like jazz and funk and soul. It's an instrumental. It's a great record. It's like, that's a jazz record from like Chicago or Detroit. That's not something from Kingsport, Tennessee. Yeah, it was from Kingsport. I should have brought that one to play, but I didn't. Okay. Sam, question? Darn it. But I do local shows, so you guys will catch me out somewhere and we'll play some. Sam, if you go to the next slide. Excellent. So another one of my favorite labels, and I just love, one of the things I love about 45 is just the art. Some of the labels are just beautiful. And this one's beautiful to me. This is Kingsport Records. It was owned by L.C. Osborne. And they were only around maybe 6-9 months. They were in the Highland area of Kingsport. There was 445s on the label I know about, and a couple LPs. This is my buddy Ralph Crawford. Andre, you know Ralph. Yeah. So his one and only record he did in 1966 as a country crooner. But cool label there. I just love the logo on that label. And if you go on to the next one. All right, well, we're back here in Bristol. So Shadow Records was in downtown Bristol, 138 State Street on the Tennessee side. This was owned by Joe Morrell. You're probably familiar with Morrell Music. Well, that was one of his legacy companies. He started out as a country musician playing in one of the first bands that was on, actually the first band I think that was on Farm and Fun Time and in the 40s. And so he just did a lot of stuff. He published like music books. He owned WOPI radio station for a while. Remember the big, if you're from this region, the big guitar museum that was out on the highway? He owned that. He invented like a lap steel guitar that's very collectible now. I don't recall the brand. You know, Roger? You know? Morrell? Okay. And somehow he had time to start a record label through all that. So Shadow Records here in Bristol, and there's a subsidiary, Zone Records, that was just gospel records. There's only 2 on that label, but luckily I have a copy of both, 2 that I know of. You know, there's always that one I'm going to find in a box of records when I go to Cheap Thrills, and they're saying, look through this box of 45s, and I'll find something that I've never seen before, and we'll both be happy. But one of my favorite records on the label is the Royal Knights Combo. That's the Wells Brothers from over in Bluff City, the soul band, if you remember those guys. They did this record in 1963, and my friend Roger got me a copy from a guy out in like Los Angeles about 4 or 5 years ago. It's an impossible to find record, but anyway, the Royal Knights Combo, if you come to one of my live shows, I do play it from time to time. I do play it on the radio show. But there's some great bluegrass and rockabilly. There's a rockabilly gospel record on this label that I know Bailey's a fan of. That's $200 or $300 record. Just it's funny. All this music and it's not, I guess, just this region, but in general. But there's all this music here that no one here really knows about or appreciates, but there's people that line up to try to buy these records at record shows in New York or Los Angeles that go, and you got that Wells Brothers? So, you know, the Royal Knights. So anyway, that was the biggest label here in Bristol. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to jump back over to Johnson City. The Brackens family wrote a lot of gospel records and decided that they were just going to do their own thing instead of going to someone else's recording studio. So they bought a used gas station on the Jonesboro Highway and turned it into a recording studio. So it was the home of Hometown Records, and I think they started about 1965 because the earliest I've been able to date one of their records through the early 70s. Mostly gospel, but there's some good rockabilly type of rock and roll records on this label, like the one I've got here, Chicken and Wine. We know that's not a gospel record, by James E. Dean. Good little record there. And if you go to the next slide, they had a sister label that was supposedly only gospel records, though there's one phenomenal rock and roll record on that label as well. And like this is one that's not a gospel, A Message from Vietnam. It's a song. Liz Owens here. It's a song about the man that she loved, and he died in Vietnam. So, interesting enough, there's a lot of protest records in the country genre about Vietnam, particularly in this area. I've got at least a dozen records about Vietnam from this area, and most of them were anti-going to war because it was, you know, my son's going to Vietnam, or my boyfriend didn't make it back from Vietnam. So. Surprisingly, it wasn't just in San Francisco that people were fussing. They were fussing here as well. So, you want to hear something on this label? All right, I'm just trying to make this fun. If I'm boring you with the records, say no. We've had all we could take. That's what my dad said to his sister-in-law once at Thanksgiving. I've had all I can take. And I think she's still mad at him 30 years later. Let's see. All right. So this is Rick Williams and the Virginia Ramblers. They are from Rural Retreat, Virginia. This is a gospel record, but kind of cool because it's mid-60s talking about spaceships. So this is That Special Rocket.
Rocket bound for glory, and someday I'm going to. Won't you be ready when it leaves here? Get your ticket for straight through. I'm gonna ride that special rocket that God made for me. Christ will be the only pilot, and heaven I'm sure to see. Are shooting rockets daily for the moon and stars above, but this rocket is bound for glory where there'll be eternal love. I'm gonna ride the special rocket that God made for me. Christ will be the only pilot, and heaven I'm sure to see. I ride that special rocket, friends and loved ones I will see. Mother and Dad will be there waiting, and with Jesus I will be. I'm gonna ride the special rocket that God made for me. Christ will be the only pilot, and heaven I'm sure to see. All the rockets they are building will be left here on this land when I board that special rocket and take Jesus by the hand. I'm gonna ride a special rocket that God made for me. Christ will be the only pilot, and heaven I'm sure to see. I'm gonna ride the special rocket that God made for me. Christ will be the only pilot, and heaven I'm sure to see.
All right, you like that one? Yeah? Okay. All right. Are we having fun? All right. I just get up here and talk about records. I'll spend all night until Renee throws me out. So I got a couple more to go over, then we'll open it up to questions here in a minute. So if you go to the next slide. So Champ Records. Remember what I talked about Richard Tone and Hobie Stanton there earlier? Well, he was not done after. He was one of those guys who had an ear for talent, and maybe he wasn't a sound businessman, so he started his record business again. And the earliest Richard Tone 45 I've been able to find is like 1959, but for the most part, mid 60s is when he started up, and really with a blast. He did Richard Tone, Skyland, Stan Tone, Champ. He had a studio in Johnson City, Champ Studio. Had one in Nashville, even bought like a small soul label in South Carolina and had a third studio there for a while. So really, some great music came out of that studio. The one I've got up here is the one that probably caused him a lot of controversy. So this is a parody of Okie from Muskogee. So Soul Culture was a band. They were students at East Tennessee State. They lived in Irwin, and they recorded this kind of as a joke. And anyway, it got on a record, and then Columbia Records and Merle Haggard's lawyers found out about it, and it wasn't a joke anymore. So Stanton got threatened with a lawsuit, so he pulled it, never sold it. But the band, they had their little 45s come in a little box of 25. So everybody in the band had theirs, so a few made it out. They didn't turn them all in. So luckily, I got a copy of this one a few years ago. It's a very rare record. You want to hear it? All right. So finally, one you've heard, Roger. So when I come to the brewery, I'm playing rock and roll records, and he's like, I've never heard these countries. records. But okay, so here's Hippie from Johnson City.
I'm proud to be a hippie from Johnson City, a small town down in eastern Tennessee. You heard about the Okie from Muskogee. Now listen to a word or two about me. They don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. I agree with that point of view, but I don't like to condemn all of our young folks based upon the actions of a few. They don't have campus problems in Muskogee. Kids there still respect the college dean. But I worked hard to get my education, and the dean should have a little respect for me. I'm proud to be a hippie from Johnson City, a small town down in eastern Tennessee. You heard about the Okie from Muskogee. Listen to a word or two about me. They like calling names out in Muskogee. Words like dirty weirdo fill the air. Don't forget that terms like hick and redneck can be used on a lot of folks out there. They don't go for love-ins in Muskogee. They like pitching woo and holding hands. Pick up their dates with greasy hair and white socks, a six-pack in their 52 sedan. I'm proud to be a hippie from Johnson City, a small town down in eastern Tennessee. You heard about the Okie from Muskogee. Now listen to a word or two about me. There's one more thing, friends, that I'd like to tell you before my song is done and we must part. I didn't write this song you heard for money, 'cause the meaning comes from the bottom of my heart. I'm proud to be a hippie from Johnson City, a small town down in eastern Tennessee. You heard about the Okie from Muskogee, and now you've heard a word or two about me, a hippie from Johnson City, Tennessee.
All right, so I would say Lou Whitney, who wrote that song, never met Merle Haggard in person because Merle never ended up back in prison. So anyway, yeah, you can see he didn't like that song very much. So anyway, rare record, but a fun record, and I do play that on the air here from time to time on my show. So you can't ban stuff forever. So so anyway, Sam, if you go to the next slide, one last label I want to touch on is Bonus Records, which was over in Lynn Garden in Kingsport. I think it was a subsidiary of Spot, like some of the others we saw, just because it was listed as a pressing plant for in Billboard magazine for Spot, though I can't prove it was a pressing plant. When I was a kid, it was a secondhand bakery, like the day-old stuff they can't sell in the grocery store. So one of those bakeries. So I don't know what was in there before that. But anyway, that's there's only 3 records on that label. I've got all 3. This one here, Wibby Lee and Paul Allen. That's Wilbur and Paul Hopkins from Wise, Virginia. That's a very rare record. That in Europe, that's a $1,000 record. But anyway, I won't tell people how many I have. Right, my wife. So anyway, well, that'll keep it a $1,000 record there. But if you go to the next slide, Sam, I just gave you some examples of local labels that I like. There's so many. So that whole time period, in particularly mid '50s to early '70s, all these folks who were in the military and had all this communications experience and electronics and all this gear, and they needed something to do. And hey, with 3 pieces of equipment, I can start a recording studio in my home. And it maybe, so different quality of so there were a bunch of record labels. Like here in Bristol, in addition to the ones I've mentioned, there was Trans World, there was Gotta Go, Lasting Sounds, Shadrach Records, Little Mountain Records, Bristol Records. That one, I don't know if you've seen that one. It says the birthplace of country music on it, but anyway. And Valley Records, which was WCYB even had some records out. So just here in Bristol, there were that many labels. So multiply that by every town in East Tennessee and Southwest Virginia and the surrounding Mountain South. You never think of little towns like Bakersville, North Carolina, that's basically 1 red light and 2 stop signs, had 2 record labels in the 60s. So you never know. So anyway, I just try to collect those, have fun with it. Sam, if we go to the next slide. And maybe I want to thank Renee and the Birthplace for having me here as a speaker and this journey I've had with Radio Bristol. So I'm not a professional speaker. I'm not a professional DJ. I'm just a guy with some records. I met Chris Trulson. My friend Clint here had an open house for his recording studio, and evidently I was playing some records, and I met Chris. And a few days later, this guy named Chris sends me this, and I thought it was a joke. He's like, "Hey, I met you. I like the way you tell the stories about the records and play them. You want to do that on the radio?" So I've been a DJ here at Radio Bristol since like October 2016. Just still love it. So love what I do. So thank you all. And next slide, Sam. And if you collect records, or I got you interested in collecting records, on the 21st for Fun Fest in Kingsport, the 3rd annual Big Lon's Vinyl Record Expo. We've got some of the sponsors in the room here with us today. Some of the folks who will actually be selling records there in the room today. But it's free to the public, 10 to 4. We've got like live, Radio Bristol will be doing a live remote from the stage. We've got 8 acts who will be performing for free. Free admission show to an 8-act concert with 50,000 records in the lobby. So it'll be a good time. So come on out, bring lots of money. And because my friend, 1, 2, 3, 4 different folks who are going to be selling records there in the audience, and then another one of my sponsors as well. So anyway, thank you all. And one of the acts who will be performing is here. So if you go to the next slide, I'm Big Lon from Digging with Big Lon here on Radio Bristol, and this is my contact information. So if you want to jot that down, if you ask me about some obscure record or anything about local music, if I don't know the answer, I'll try to get you the answer. But now the important part, it's about you guys. What questions do you have? Or Renee, do you have some questions? Okay.
So who would open up for questions?
Don't be shy.
One thing I noticed continually is the recordings got better with time, and I noticed that the bass guitar was hardly ever featured until later on.
Yeah.
So is that just generally?
In general, like the old time music and early country music and early bluegrass, I mean, there would be a stand up bass, but a lot of times there wasn't a lot of bass in those string bands. And if you notice some of the early ones, there's not a lot of drums either. It's just a guy with a fiddle, a guitar, and a mandolin showed up, and we got a band. So which is still kind of like how a lot of bluegrass music is today. Kind of it's whoever's there is who's playing on the record. So yeah, as over time and the quality of recording equipment and the technology, there's a significant leap from 78 RPM records on shellac to vinyl records on 45 format. I'm sure I could get Clint up here to give us a whole dissertation on that. He owns a recording studio here in town, so and is a sound engineer, Grammy-winning sound engineer here in the audience. But anyway.
Cool. Yeah, and one other thing I noticed was a lot of times the instruments would be as loud as the vocal or even louder than the vocals. Whereas today you want the vocals to pop usually over that. So is that just a progression too?
Yeah, I think that's a progression. So early on, you got the whole band singing into one live microphone. So all the instruments, and you're like telling, hey, you play the fiddle too loud. You go stand in the corner over there. And, the guy, you're kind of soft on the guitar. You need to stand right next to the mic. And the backup singer sounds horrible. Make him stand in the back of the room, and it'll balance out. Because everybody on one mic. Of course, over time, like if like Spot Records, I think maybe they had an 8-track system, and then Trail had like a 16-track. Now I don't even, how many, is it 64? Do you know, Clint? Unlimited and digital. But even up to, I guess, when you were putting stuff before CDs, when you're putting things on record, up to like like the Beatles' last record, I think they were on like a 32-track. So you could have 32 tracks at one time. So like in this, and say like a great example is like Boston. If you were a Boston fan, like those guitar solos, those are like 4 to 5 record tracks, 4 to 5 guitar tracks put together that sound like one. That's why nobody can ever sound like them at the club, because you can't get 37 people on the stage. But anyway, I guess you could if the stage is big enough. All right, great questions. Any others?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Jukebox Jess.
Hello.
Here from Bristol. Are there shows that you listened to growing up, Big Lon, that helped with your announcing style? Because you have this really cool FM announcing style. It's kind of quiet and just like draws you in. It's really like perfect for FM.
I don't know. So if you go back and listen to the first shows, I was kind of playing around with it. The wife told me to tone it back. She didn't want stragglers following me home. It was too much. But that's like, who's the crazy chick in the driveway? So anyway, I don't know. She just followed me from the radio station. But no, not really. I guess just listening to records and watching Gilligan's Island growing up. I don't know. I believe it or not, I was an extremely shy kid. I would have never. You couldn't have paid me to do public speaking, and I don't know. It doesn't bother me. I guess. Just what I do in my professional life, and negotiating with really tough people to negotiate with when there's a room full of mean, angry German lawyers on the other end of the table or stuff like that. So talking to people like this about stuff that I enjoy, it's no problem at all.
It comes across well. The
thank you.
soft-spoken, chill.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? We've got one up in the corner. Our very own Sam.
Sam had a question. Sam's done a great job, by the way. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you for the recognition. Y'all didn't see me like running up and down stairs like 8 times before this started. So it was a process, but I think it came out okay. But so a lot of the records you talked about are either very rare or just completely unseen, like on the official release. And I don't think it's too far to say a lot of these songs are only on these records. So I have to ask if you've ever undertaken or thought about taking steps to like digitize these songs and upload them onto the internet where they can be shared wider than just through records. Well,
that's a great question. And yes, a lot of these, the only place you're going to find them is that little 7-inch piece of vinyl that came out in 1965. There may have been 300 copies of it. So just think how many survive today. But I've talked to folks about doing some projects. I am working with Bear Family Records on a project to have most of the richer tones in a box set. So I'm not supposed to tell you that, but I just did. So I guess they'll know that I've told you that. But anyway, probably later this year, early next year, you'll see something released from Bear Family Records over in Germany. It's been a effort by a lot of music historians across the world trying to piece together all the richer tones, because some of them are down through, there's only one known copy, and there's probably still 11 or so that a copy hadn't surfaced, but we know it was pressed. That's how rare they are. But I have, there's a band, there was a soul band here in Bristol that Little Caesar and the Utopians. And I have had Clint at his studio record a couple of those for me that I've sent to a record label in London, and they've repressed them But with that, the writers of the song have a contract with them, and they get royalties from it. If just somebody randomly calls up and go, "Hey, I'm Big Tom at the record label. Can you give me a copy of that record?" Most of the time, I'm going to say no, because you're going to repress it in another country that doesn't have the copyright laws, and you're going to make $1 million off of it, and the family of the blues guy who did that song in 1940 is going to get zilch from it. So no, I'm not going to do that. So I try to give back to the community in that way. And actually, that example, that soul record, I confirmed with the artist that he had signed a contract before I would release any of the records. That way they were compensated appropriately. But anyway, I've thought about doing a project maybe on Kingsport or Twin City, just because they're so rare. Some of those, there's only one known copy in the world. And there's less than 5 copies that are documented. Now, that doesn't mean somewhere here in Bristol there's a stack of them that's sitting in somebody's barn, but haven't been discovered yet.
Anyone else?
Hey, Lon, what's your favorite record store? No, just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, that's Cheap Thrills Records.
There you go. Now, any of those
Bristol, Virginia.
Any
Princeton,
boutique
West
labels?
Pretty good store too.
Yep. Any of those boutique labels that specialize in any kind of like off-the-wall genres? That would just do like a surf punk kind of thing, just anything obviously the person that owned it was really into that little genre.
That has been the case around the country. I don't see a lot of locals that are like that. Maybe in the 80s, some of the folks that were really into punk records, and they weren't going to get signed by anybody, and they said, "Well, I'm going to start my own label, and we can ride skateboards and sing songs." There's some labels like that they put out 5, 6, 7 records. There's a few in Knoxville like that. I guess the closest to kind of that EdMac would put out all these like beach and surfing, hot rod, kind of like West Coast kind of records but people from Appalachia singing about their Corvette and their Shelby Cobra or whatever. But there are a lot of the vanity labels. There was Arthur Smith Studios down in Charlotte. That there's a lot of bands from his region record there, like a lot of garage rock bands that would probably, if they came to some of the local guys and said, I want to record here, and like, son, we only record 2 types of music, country and western, and you got long hair, so so anyway, I guess there's some that kind of specialize in certain things. They kind of get in a rhythm. Like Richard Tome was like that. They kind of got in a rhythm of a certain country sound and a certain bluegrass sound, and they would try to go out and find other artists that kind of sounded similar. I don't know how you find anybody that sounds similar to the Stanley Brothers after you've recorded them, but that was, he would try to do that. Great question.
Hey, Lon. Just a weird question, but on a lot of these records, you see the addresses.
Yeah.
For Kingsport, and I was just wondering how obsessed you are, or not, just into it you are, that you would, if you're on your travels and you're like, oh, that's where that was recorded, or that's where that was recorded. Do you ever look those addresses up and see what's there now?
I do, yeah. I have done that. A lot of these places are, houses in residential areas, and there's a couple labels here in Bristol that were basically in the basement of a house. So that, I have done that. There's the interesting thing about the small labels, everybody knows who Capitol and Columbia and the big labels are. So if you're at a radio station, you get, here's the weekly 40 records, new artists from Warner Brothers. Okay, well, we know that's a big name. They're pushing those. But you get a record from Moon Records. Like I was talking to Roger, in Tennessee alone, there were 3 different labels called Moon Records. So, it's just almost like it's your business card, not only for the band, but for the record label. Moon Records Clinton, Tennessee? Where the heck's Clinton, Tennessee? So it was kind of a lot of the small labels put their address and everything on there. By chance, somebody out in Texas goes, I really like that record. Wonder where that record label's at. So they could get in touch with them and learn more about their records or buy some records or get in touch with their artist or whatever. So, but there's people who go and look up those places. Matter of fact, like you see the historical marker for Richard Tone Records over in Bristol, it's where the building before the building of the building used to be. So it's like, it's beside the farmer's market. Well, that's where the building used to be. Like 2 iterations ago, it was torn down, in probably 25 years ago. Great question.
Anybody else? Well, this has been great. We've really enjoyed having you with us again, Lonnie. Let's give him a big hand. And we got the live stream going, so hopefully we had some good people watching virtually too.
Awesome.
So we got that going. But thank you again for being here with us. I hope everyone really enjoyed that. I know I did, and I wrote down. I was sending myself about 5 emails with different ideas of things I want to talk to you about later. Before we break up and y'all have a chance to talk a little bit more with Lonnie, let me just tell you what's coming up at the museum so that you can start planning your calendars now. Our next speaker sessions will be on Tuesday, August 13th at 7 p.m. And we'll have Brandon Story here, and he'll be talking about gospel music according to the Bristol Sessions. And that'll be in person here at the museum and via YouTube again for live streaming. We only have 2 more weeks of our current special exhibit, A Cardboard History of Blue Ridge Music. It's here through July 21st. So if you have not checked it out, please come back and see it before it goes. It's a wonderful exhibit of those ephemera, those types of things that don't get saved very often. Often, they have their own rarities of those old letterpress posters from touring musicians in this area. Saturday, July 27th at 10 a.m., we have our monthly museum volunteer orientation. So if you would like to help us out as a volunteer, please come to that. We also, on that same day, July 27th, from 2 to 4, actually 2 to 5, we have our monthly Bluegrass Jam. We have that every 4th Saturday. And on that same day, July 27th at 6:30 p.m., we have a square dance here at the museum in the Special Exhibits Gallery. Always a good time. You do not have to have a partner. You do not have to know what you're doing. All you have to do is be excited and have fun with us. And then Friday, August 2nd at 10:30 a.m., we have our monthly museum story time for tiny tots and their grown-ups, and that is going to be Miss Dorothy and her bookmobile. And we always do a book reading, a book with Mama Molasses, and a fun craft. So if you've got littles in your life, that's a good thing to plan for. Let's say thank you again to Lonnie, and thank you for being with us.
All right, thank you for having me.